BookTube, it's Jana, and this is my reading week. With Shelf Slam, this month's challenge is to read books with one-word titles. So the first one I'm going to tell you about is an audiobook that I attempted to listen to, and this is, I don't know if you can see, Labyrinth by Kate Moss. I started listening to this and I just found it dire. It's a DNF for me. I got about a third of the way in, but I just was finding I didn't enjoy the writing style. I found the whole story a little bit of a cliche, a little bit Indiana Jones / Da Vinci Code, and I just wasn't enjoying it, so I DNF that one. So it wasn't off to a great start, really. And the next one I read is Severed by Frances Larson, and this is a non-fiction book, and this is a history of heads lost and heads found. So I don't know if you can see the fabulous cover. And this is all about different sort of things that have happened in history to human heads, from execution via the guillotine in France and beheadings in the UK of traitors and famous characters, you know, the royals, Anne Boleyn and those kind of people, to shrunken heads that people used to collect. Just tell you the contents of this book so you can see the kind of things in there. You've got shrunken heads, you've got trophy heads, you've got deposed heads, you've got framed heads, you've got potent heads, you've got bone heads, you've got dissected heads, and you've got living heads. It was absolutely fascinating. In fact, I'll just read you a little bit from the beginning of it so that you can just get the gist of the types of information that you may come across in this book. So Josiah Wilkinson liked to take Oliver Cromwell's head to breakfast parties, like you do. The broken metal spike, which had been thrust through Cromwell's skull at Tyburn 160 years earlier, provided a convenient handle for guests to use when examining the leathery relic over their devil kidneys. In 1822, one of the guests wrote, "A frightful skull it is, covered with its parched yellow skin like any other mummy, and with its chestnut hair, eyebrows and beard, is in glorious preservation. It was Wilkinson's prized possession, and he kept it in an oak box, specially made for the purpose. When friends voiced their reservation about its authenticity, he pointed to the distinctive wart over Cromwell's left eye." And so it goes on to explain the story of how Wilkinson ended up with Oliver Cromwell's head, and there is an absolutely lovely little drawing of it there. So it's stuff like that you'll get, all different aspects of what has happened to heads, and I found it fascinating. A really enjoyable read if you like that kind of thing, and just a quirky bit of history. Another audiobook that I listened to, which has a one-word title, is Bossy Pants by Tina Fey. Tina Fey is famous for the sitcom 30 Rock and Saturday Night Live, and she also wrote Mean Girls, and this just sort of talks about her experiences of growing up, and then how she got to where she is today, and I absolutely love this. She narrates it herself. It's really irreverent, it's really funny, it's really honest, and it really just goes to show that she's just a normal person who worked really hard to get where she was. So I thoroughly recommend that. Absolutely complete entertainment. I have veered off a little bit from the one-word titles just because I've been enjoying listening to audiobooks while I've been driving around in my car and doing my work and things. So I hadn't got that many with one-word titles. So another one that I listened to was The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer. And I know that a lot of people have absolutely loved this book. Amanda Palmer does narrate it herself, but for me, nah, I just couldn't get along with it. I did finish it, I listened to all of it, but I just found it, I don't know if it's because I found it terribly un-British, the way she describes how she would just put something out on Twitter to find somebody who would maybe bring food to a gig that she was doing, or to put them up for the night, and it just seems so un-British for me. It's just, no, that's just, you just don't ask. It's yeah. So I couldn't get along with that, but also I did find her a little bit up her own arse, and I just couldn't get along with that. I'm sure she's very nice, and her friends and her family love her to bits, but I'm not sure we would necessarily get on in real life. The whole thing about where she talks about how she strips naked and gets her fans to draw all over her body, I just found really distasteful. Now I don't know if it's just me and my age or my Britishness, I don't know. I just found that her ego was just a little bit too much for me to take. Sorry, Amanda. And while I've veered off a little bit from the one-word titles, I had two books that I'd had half finished, so I did actually decide to get my head down and finish them. And one of these I started reading just before Christmas, and that is The Haunted Hotel by Wilkie Collins, because it was one of my Christmas ghost stories, but then Christmas got so busy that I just didn't get anywhere, so I thought I just need to finish it off. And I ended up really enjoying this. It's very, very readable for the book, for the time that it's written, because sometimes I find books written in the 19th century takes a while to get your head into the way the language is, but it reads really easily, and it just sort of pulls together the threads of a family where the heir to a lordship basically jilts his intended and runs off with another woman. She's heartbroken, as you can understand. He goes off to Italy to live in a palace, and he takes they take tour guides with them, and both him and the tour guide mysteriously disappear. His wife comes back to England, and she's very haunted and very sort of not quite right, and comes to the previous fiance and says, you know, our paths are going to cross again and it's not going to end well for me. And basically, so they all end up in Italy in this palace that's now been turned into a hotel, and a few little dodgy, spooky things happen, and I really enjoyed it. So it's a great ghost story if that's the kind of thing that floats your boat. And another book that I finished, which was part of March's 2016 titles, which I got halfway through and didn't finish at the end of the month, and then I started reading other things, is The Devil's Evidence by Simon Kurt Unsworth, and this is the second in the Devil's Detective series, the first one being The Devil's Detective, and this is kind of like fantasy crime. It's set in hell and heaven. It follows Thomas Fool, who is the head of Hell's information men, and they're almost like an investigative police force in hell. And for this particular book, Fool has to go to heaven because there's been some bodies found amongst the joyful, because even though you're in heaven and hell, you can die. And I just absolutely love the imagination of Simon Kurt Unsworth, the world building, the descriptions of some of the demons in here are amazing, particularly the one made of maggots. He definitely stands out for me. And I just absolutely love it. I found this much better than the first one, actually. I did enjoy the first one, but I really enjoyed this one. It's quite a big book, and it was relatively slow at the beginning, but you just get sucked into this strange imagination of how heaven and hell work, and just the way he describes some of the places in hell are very evocative. You get the smells, you get the sounds, but you get the squelches of the mud and the guts and everything that's on the ground. It can be quite gory in places if you're a bit nervous about those sorts of things. It can be a little bit on the gory side if you're a bit squeamish, but really enjoyed it. So if you want a good page turner, it's a fantasy novel but has crime running through it, recommend that one. And finally, I'm so proud of myself. The one-word title that I have read so far this month is the mother of all one-word title books, and that is Middlemarch by George Eliot. I mean, and I know we just need to look at how beautiful that is, because it's a Penguin English Library edition with the beautiful pink cover and the lovely little cameos on it. But this is massive. And if you've seen me on this channel before, you know I've got an immortal fear of massive books, and if you look at the I'll just show you the writing. It's so close together and it's so tiny, and I have read every single word of it, and I am so proud. There are 923 pages in this book, and I have to say that the first 700 pages were a bit hard going. The story's quite, the narrative's there, but George Eliot does go off a little bit of a tangent, and she writes a bit all around the houses. But after page 700 it started to really get going, and it was well worth it. So it was going to be maybe a 2-3 star up until page 700, but ended up being a solid 4/4.5 star for me. It would have been 5 if I'd not just found the first 700 pages such a slog. And there's so many different threads. I mean, it's regarded as an absolute, you know, classic novel. Some people regard it as the best novel ever written. I wouldn't say it was that for me, but it was. I'm definitely glad I read it, and it was definitely well worth it. And it follows all the different inhabitants of this sort of little village called Middlemarch, and it's got all the trials and tribulations of the day, of the middle classes of that time, the pressure of women to make the correct marriage so that they are supported and looked after as they move through their old age. But the characters are fabulously flawed. It's not all syrupy sweet. In fact, there's hardly any of it that's syrupy sweet. People aren't nice to each other in this book. People are bitchy about each other. Yeah, there are parts where people really don't treat each other well, and it was quite realistic in that respect. In fact, and I think you sort of see that even though this book is a few hundred years old, human beings, we're always the same. We always have been the same. We always will be the same. So it was well worth a read. I'm very proud of myself, and I read it. And so that's where I'm at so far with my reads for Shelf Slam, the one-word titles. Got a few more books that I'm currently reading, so they will be in my next My Reading Week, in brackets, weeks. So I'll see you all soon. Keep reading. Bye!